One man changed the trajectory of Major League Baseball forever, in which it altered the lives of so many, which also led to abominable decisions by franchises that led to years of futility for them, but also led to decisions that led to World Series trophies for others, and it was all made possible by one singular human. The $2 billion spent in just this offseason isn't thanks to him, and to know how it was all made possible, we must traverse back to 1885, when the first players' union in Major League Baseball was formed, called the Brotherhood of Professional Baseball Players. It was initiated 9 years after the National League was formed, and 16 years prior to the birth of the American League. Later on, after multiple attempts at reinvigorating and updating and modernizing the union, a 1965 search to do so led them to Marvin Miller, an employee for the United Steelworkers of America who promptly galvanized the players in creating a unified group. And in 1968, Miller helped players negotiate the first ever collective bargaining agreement. This included raising the minimum player salary from $6 to $10 grand, and later in 1970, helped facilitate what is now known as the arbitration process, where it allows teams and players to argue over their deserved paycheck by way of the courts. And finally, in 1975, it all culminated after years of arduous, tedious, and strenuous back and forth involving the courts, union, and ownership. The players were granted the right to free agency. And the first ever free agency signing within the open market went to Jim Hunter, or better known as Catfish Hunter for some, as he inked a 5-year, $3.7 million pact with the New York Yankees by spurning the Oakland A's. And years later, Miller's landmark that he set was later met with a clamoring outcry by so many to get Marvin into the Hall of Fame. But the message was not received at all by the voters, as prior to his passing in 2012, he actually verbally pulled his name from the running while calling the process a quote-unquote farce. He wanted nothing to do with it, slamming the organization, even saying if he was selected after his passing, he wanted his family to not be involved at all, and not to touch foot in Cooperstown, New York. However, despite all that, the committee later recanted a decade later, and he was inducted in 2020. This now leads us into the ripple effect of Marvin Miller's legacy and his plight from decades ago, and how it inherently changed how teams build their roster by signing players on the open market. But it's also created landmines and challenges for particularly mid-market, smaller market teams. For example, if they sign a player who doesn't produce or live up to their contract, it can immensely hinder and preclude their team from shelling out money elsewhere to better their squad because they have a certain payroll they must abide by. Just look at the Reds with Joey Votto, as we now get into some of the worst contracts in the last decade. Votto inked a 10-year, $225 million contract with the Cincinnati Reds, which amounted to about 1/4 of the Reds' payroll for the totality of his contract, including 25.96% of it in his last year of his deal in 23. And although he's a 4-time All-Star and an MVP in his tenure prior to signing the contract, he was just unable to replicate that same success, as he only racked in 2 All-Star games in the 10 years, which resulted them not even winning a playoff series, as they couldn't supplement talent around him due to the lack of finances in Cincinnati. They needed him to live up to this contract, which he didn't necessarily do, resulting in the lack of success that they had. But even big market teams are not immune to making bad decisions free agency either. As for example, the New York Yankees tried pivoting after losing out on Robinson Cano to the Seattle Mariners a decade ago by signing Jacoby Ellsbury and Brian McCann, but it nosedived the franchise for years. Ellsbury signed a 7-year, $153 million contract, which at the time made him the 3rd highest paid outfielder, and it was a straight disaster from the beginning, straight unmitigated disaster, as he only played in 53% of possibly played games, while also missing out on the entirety of the 2018 and 2019 seasons before the Yankees just relented and straight released him. But the most decrepit contract of them all over the last decade is one we are in the midst of right now, and that is Javier Baez of the Detroit Tigers, who's on a 6-year, $140 million contract, and since pen to paper, all he has done is amass a .262 on-base percentage, a .610 OPS, a .71 OPS plus. Absolutely abominable numbers. The once tantalizing superstar with the Chicago Cubs has become one of the most unproductive players in all of baseball, especially last season, as it culminated in a negative .7 WAR, in which only 30 players on all the ball had a worse wins above replacement. However, there's a flip side of this. There's a positive side of this. Thanks to Marvin Miller, teams have been afforded the latitude to elevate their trajectory of their franchise by signing free agents to substantial deals that have helped facilitate winning, like when the Nationals signed Max Scherzer, whose 7-year, $210 million contract in 2015, and during that span he amassed a 1.52 ERA plus and a 2.92 fielding independent pitching, while also notching 5 All-Star games and 2 Cy Youngs, not to mention being one of the catalysts to a World Series win in 2019. And despite an immense trepidation from clubs shelling out big money in years to starting pitchers who seemingly always get hurt, Max had bumped that and said, "It doesn't permeate to me." That said, Max is not the only anomaly, as John Lester bucks the trend as well, as he signed a 6-year, $155 million pact with the Chicago Cubs, as JL accumulated a 3.64 ERA during that span, including 2 All-Star games and 2 top 10 Cy Young finishes, and the best year of his career with a 5.6 WAR, while winning 19 games and, of course, breaking the century-long World Series curse in 2016. All of these signings that I just mentioned, whether decrepit or fruitful, were all paved by the legend Marvin Miller. It just would not have been feasible without him. Before 1975, players were not given the latitude contractually to play for another team. They were beholden to their current team for as long as they were under contract. In this video, I just wanted to pay homage to a man who changed the landscape of Major League Baseball. Alright, thanks for watching, and if you did enjoy, please do me a favor and consider subscribing, and peace out.